In Part 4 of Lecture 6, we will discuss classes that contain arrays. Now that we are comfortable working with arrays, let's ask the question, what's it like to have an array as part of a class? In this case, you will see that we have two arrays. A two-dimensional array that will store the results of 4 exams for our 30 students. We also have an array of averages for each of our students. Notice that when I declare the array grades, I have two separate pairs of open and closed brackets. This indicates that the array is two-dimensional. The main program begins with a comment telling us that the program will calculate term averages for our students based on their having taken 4 exams. The main program consists of 3 method calls: to read grades, find averages, and write grades. These names accurately describe exactly what they each will be doing. Read grades begins with a comment telling us that it will read the complete set of grades. Then we have its header, public static void read grades. Since we're going to be doing input here, we have a declaration for the scanner object keyboard. Scanner keyboard equals new scanner system in. We have 2 variables we'll be using as indices, int I and j. Now we're going to have here 2 loops, an outer loop which corresponds to each student, and an inner loop that corresponds to each exam for that student. For I equals 0, I is less than numStudents I++, and inside that, for j equals 0, j is less than numExams j++. We'll print the message using system.out.println grade on test number plus j plus for student number plus I, and then a tab and a question mark to end the line. We then will read in the grade, grades ij equals keyboard next int. Outside of the inner loop, but inside the outer loop, we skip a line for clarity with system.out.println. We now need another close brace to close the outer loop, and another one to close the method. findAverages, as the name implies, will find the average for each student. It begins public static void findAverages. And the first thing it does is to declare the 3 variables int I, j, sum. Again, there is a pair of loops, one inside the other. The outer loop again corresponds to each student. For I equals 0, I is less than numStudents I++. Inside the loop, before we calculate any averages, we set sum equal to 0. For j equals 0, j is less than numExams j++. Sum plus equals grades sub ij plus equals means that we will add this particular value of grades to the total. Outside of the inner loop, but still inside the outer loop, averages I equals sum divided by numExams. With this, we will have calculated the averages for each student in the class. Write averages will output not only the averages for each student, but the grades as well. We start public static void write grades, and we declare the 2 index variables I and j. We will then write a header, student, exam 1, exam 2, exam 3, exam 4, and average. Each of these separated by a tab. You see 2 strings here specifically because I can't fit all of this on one line on the slide. The loop will begin with, for I equals 0, I is less than numStudents, I++. I will print a line number, and after that I'll print the data for each of the students in the class. Here we see the inner loop. For j equals 0, j is less than numExams, j++. We will use systemoutprint to print a tab, and then systemoutprint grades sub ij. Once we are outside the inner loop, we print a tab and the averages using systemoutprintln, so we can go to the next line. We then close the outer loop, we then close the method, and close the class. One problem with the program that we just saw is that everything is in one class, including the main method. This will not always be the case. Can we rewrite this program so the details about the grades are separate from the main method? Also, while it's reasonable to assume that there will be exactly 4 exams, we might not necessarily have exactly 30 students. Can we rewrite this so the computer can receive data about an indefinite number of students? The answer to both questions is yes. As always, we begin with import Java util scanner, then public class grades. Now we will have here some private data. Private final int max students equals 30, numExams equal 4. Notice that here we have max students, not numStudents, because while we expect that we will not have any more than 30 students, we can't assume in this case that we will have exactly 30. Below this we will have private int numStudents, private int open close brackets grades for the 2-dimensional array, and private int open close bracket averages for the 1-dimensional array. Here we will see also the default constructor, public grades, and inside here we will set grades equal to new int max students numExams, and in this way we have the array ready to go. Now we'll write read grades, which will read the entire set of grades for us. Since we do not have a predetermined number of students, we're going to return that number from read grades. Hence, the way the header is written is public int read grades. The one index we'll work with here is j. We now have to have a scanner, so we have scanner keyboard equals new scanner system in. And then we will write systemoutprintln enter a negative grade for exam 1 to finish. We set number of students here to 0. And please keep in mind we don't declare numStudents because it is a property of the class. There are no students yet, and we're going to fix that in about a moment. We're now going to use a do-while loop because we know we need to go in here at least once. We'll get the first exam grade. If it's non-negative, we'll get the rest. If it is negative, then we know there are no more students, and we will simply quit the method. The first thing that we do is we prompt the user by writing systemoutprintln grade on test number 1 for student number, and here you'll see we have numStudents plus 1 in parentheses, so that we will not print the number numStudents and then afterwards a 1. Now and then lastly a tab. Grades numStudents 0 equals keyboard next in reads in that first grade. If it is less than 0, we will break out of the loop right now. Now we have the inner loop where we will read the remaining grades. For j equals 1, j is less than numExams, j++. Systemoutprintln grade on test number j plus 1. For student number numStudents plus 1. And then the tab. And lastly, grades numStudents j equals keyboard next int. With this, we are now out of the inner loop. We're going to use system.out.println to skip a line for us. We'll now add 1 to numStudents so it indicates the number of students for whom we have currently read in exam scores. And as long as numStudents is less than maxStudents, we know there's a possibility of reading in more grades. Now below you'll notice we write if numStudents is equal to maxStudents. If that's the case, we've already read in 30 grades. What we're going to do now is subtract 1 from the total, and then we will return the value numStudents. We now find that findAverages is pretty close to what we had before. Public void findAverages, int I, j, sum. Averages equals new int numStudents. We did not before this know how many students there would be, so we didn't know how many averages there would be. The outer loop is again for I equals 0, I is less than numStudents, I++. We will now reset the sum to 0 so we can calculate a new average. For j equals 0, j is less than numExams j++. Sum plus equals grades ij, so we can add this particular grade to the total. And lastly, back in the outer loop, averages sub I equals sum divided by numExams. That's the end of the outer loop and the end of the method. Write average again. We'll print a header, and the outer loop is for each student. We will print a number, go into the inner loop, and print all of his exam grades, or her exam grades. Then back in the outer loop, we will then print the average for the student and go to the next line. In the last slide, we didn't just finish the outer loop and the method write averages, we finished the class grades. Now we're going to write in a separate class calc averages. And you'll notice here the presence of an object belonging to the class grades. You'll notice we also have n students to tell us how many students there will be. And then you'll notice we have n students equals myClass.readGrades, myClass.findAverage, myClass.findGrades. In this regard, we again will call each of the 3 methods, but from the context of a main program in a different class. Well, we would not need it in this case, and I think that it would not make the program any more complicated to have everything in one class. This is much closer to what we will do in most situations working with objects.